Okay, welcome everybody to the Centenarian Club, April 18th. Andrew and I are currently tuning in from Mexico, and last week we were having some fun. We rented a Airbnb in Bacalar, it's called. It's like this big blue lagoon. It's gorgeous. This week we're more at a resort for a wedding. So it was really cool. You want to tell them about the lazy river that we did?
Sure. Yeah, this was awesome. So Bacalar is it's a lagoon. I still don't even know like what that is, but it's basically like textbook Fiji, Maldives type of water, like super blue. It was awesome. And then there's this one part where the lake kind of goes into this like narrow, like river, I guess, and it's this like natural lazy river. So you just go for the day, and they just give you a life jacket. You just like float down. It was so cool, and then you can just like walk up, float as many times as you want. But it was like the coolest, I don't know, one of the coolest like natural places I've been to for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I found I'm like super into like rocks and crystals and stones and all that kind of stuff, but I found like the coolest stone. So I'll try to show you guys and see if you can see it on camera. All right, here it is.
The theatrics, I love it.
Woohoo! Congrats, guys! Yay!
Yeah, thank you. We're engaged. We're excited to tell you guys. So that happened this weekend on Saturday. So we're happy to share that with you guys. I love
That was the best news. That was the best news.
Lazy River was real. That did actually happen.
Yeah, he brought
I was gonna say, it was like I felt like it was like one of my kids because they always show me stones. So when you left, I was like, oh my gosh, she's gonna come show some rocks.
his face too when he left. He's like too funny. Okay, so we just want to share you with that with you guys, our exciting announcement, and then we're gonna pass it over to Allie. I'm gonna share the screen for Allie just so that the internet hopefully stays stable on her side. But we're so excited to have you here, Allie. Yeah, we're so excited to have you here and sharing your wisdom and to be learning from you. So yeah, I'll pass it over to you and we can go from there. Let me know when you want to start.
Perfect. You can start. Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Hi, guys. It's so great to be here. I mean, I do jump in quite often. Oh, there we go. We see the screen. I do jump in quite often, but it's really fun to be here and present myself in a different way. I'm Dr. Alyssa Kirby. I'm a naturopathic doctor, and I went to school with Marissa and Andrew. And today we're going to be talking a lot about like mind-body connection and inherited trauma, and really the concept of it didn't start with you. And just to share a little bit about me and who I am to be talking about this, I'm a biochemist turned naturopath. I went into this field to help people. I wanted to be a pharmacist. I worked in the hospital. I saw that there was so much more to health that we could be delivering, and that led me to naturopathic medicine. And during my time as a student in naturopathic medicine, we're learning about the mind-body connection and all these amazing topics. And I couldn't help but start to think about how a lot of my own mental health issues and the things that I struggled with, how much of it was really my own. So just to share a little bit more, my grandfather is a Holocaust survivor. And after sort of diving in a little bit to the mind-body connection, I started to ask myself, I can't imagine that the traumas that he went through just disappeared over generations. How much of what he went through is inside me? And how much of what I'm going through is actually my own? And this whole question led me on some amazing research. And to this day, I'm, still a huge proponent of inherited trauma, of mind-body connection, of how our spiritual health influences our disease. And I'm so excited to talk to you all about it today. So we'll go to the next one. And so just briefly, we'll sort of go through, but raise of hands, who here believes that trauma can be inherited? And if you're not sure, that's okay. Okay, we got a few hands. I see Veronique, I see Marissa. Amazing. I see Matt, Mark. Okay, so we have some thoughts around it. Amazing, yes. And who here believes that emotions can influence disease? Okay, Tanya, yes. Mark, yes, yes, yes. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of good yeses. Okay, this is good. So we have some foundation here to support this discussion. And last but not least, who here believes that our spiritual health impacts our physical health? I love it. Amazing. Okay, good. So in general, that's what we're going to be talking about today. And the way I like to explain it, and we'll go to the next slide, the way I like to explain it, because when it comes to health topics, there's so many things that we talk about. There's our diet and our lifestyle and our nutrition and our exercise and our hydration and our spiritual and our stress, right? There's so many things that I want to make sure that we're able to like organize it of where it belongs. It's my philosophy that everybody has their unique health puzzle. And each topic that we bring up, so inherited family trauma, mind-body connection, genetics, hydration, nutrition, are each individual pieces of that puzzle. And what our job is as humans, as naturopaths, is to try to identify enough of each other's health puzzle so we could start making sense of our own health. And so everything that we're going to be talking about today is just another piece of the puzzle. It doesn't mean that this is everything. This is not the answer to all our health issues, but it's another thing that we can add to our toolbox and say, hey, this can be influencing our state of health too. So I'll start off by just playing a little game. We see the puzzle here. How about everybody write down a few things that they believe is part of their health puzzle? And if anyone feels that they're ready, they can start to unmute and sort of let's just whip out whatever we feel could be part of our health puzzle.
I can start. I know one of the things that lately I had an experience in September that had me feeling very claustrophobic. And ever since then, like that trauma that happened, I've had more anxiety and claustrophobic feelings. And I can directly correlate it to when that initiated, when I was actually trapped in September. So
interesting. Thank you, Marissa, for sharing. That's awesome. Does anyone else have anything to share about their health puzzle?
Yeah, I can share as well. So I've noticed for me, especially the last like 2 winters, they've just been like much more difficult for me. And just whenever I'm in like a warm, sunny environment, so many of my, health issues or just like how I'm feeling overall, like completely changes. In summer, but if I get away in the winter, I just feel way better. And I'm not sure what exactly that is, but there's probably a good like genetic component since my dad's from like a very warm climate. So yeah, I've just been thinking more and more about how your environment plays such a big role. And like, the sun and heat would be one part of it, but there's so many other factors as well.
That's absolutely so true. So like sunshine, vitamin D, outdoors, your relationship to nature, and how much you notice that influences your health. That's definitely part of your health puzzle.
One thing that we were talking about was just stress and the impact that daily or ongoing stressors can have on our physical and mental health as well.
Absolutely. That is such a great point. I call stress the silent killer because that's what it is. You don't really feel its impact until it's either too late or we start to have physical symptoms. Is there anyone else that wanted to share? Kat, did you want to share anything on your health puzzle?
Yes, so for me, the biggest thing is still figuring out and seeing the connection between my energy levels throughout the cycle, and also how I take care of myself throughout the cycle and how it impacts my cycle. It's a lot of cycle-related issues, but I see the connection. And of course, Marissa helped me with that tremendously, but it's a huge thing right now, and I'm trying to figure it out still. Yes, thank you.
I love that. Thank you, Kat. Definitely our reproductive health, our hormones, the impact our lifestyle has on it all, self-care. Absolutely. Thomas, did you want to share? I thought I saw your microphone on.
Yeah, so it's interesting when you were talking about your example there, because my parents, or my mom at least, escaped from East Germany, right? From Hitler kind of thing, and talks a lot about it. Actually, I just went through the journey with her and how they traveled by foot through the mountains to a nearby village, and actually followed the whole path. I recorded this whole time with my mom, and just, you know, she was so appreciative of me going through that journey with her and kind of looking for her first home and stuff. So I don't know, like I don't know, but it's interesting to just kind of just even dive into a little bit of this perspective on, you know, could there be some things there? I mean, my mom's still living, and so it'd be interesting, right? There may be some things there. I don't really know. I'm just sharing kind of some of that.
I love that. And exactly like you said, right? What we're doing is we're just discovering, it's like we're planting a seed. There's a lot to this topic, but we're going to start small and just introduce the topic, see how it resonates with all of us. And right off the bat, I mean, you know, your mom has an experience journeying and some trauma. How does that impact us? How does that fall into us? So we're just going to sort of begin to talk about it a little bit. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that I added in some of my own pieces to the health puzzle, and these are very general, but as you can see from our conversation, it can go anywhere, right? Marissa brought up the example of feeling a lot of anxiety around being claustrophobic lately. That would be part of her health puzzle now. So in here, I put things like relationships and my thoughts and spiritual and exercise and sleep and genes and diet and beliefs. And you can see how many things impact our physical health, right? Let's dive in a little bit more into spiritual health and disease, because it seems like a novel concept today, but this has been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And it started in the Vedas, Ayurvedic medicine, all the way in India, right? They talked a lot about their chakras and how their chakra systems, each one, right? We know that there's the crown, there's the third eye, there's the throat, there's the, I'm going to blank for a second, solar plexus, right? We have our root chakra, we have all our different chakra systems, but they're not in isolation. Each area corresponds to an organ, corresponds to an emotion, corresponds to physical things that impact it, and also emotional things that impact it. So we see from thousands of years ago, there's this sort of direct connection between physical areas, right, and spiritual impact. If we're really angry, we hurt our liver. If we're too joyous or too sad, we hurt our heart. And this is nothing new. This also trailed along in Chinese medicine. In Chinese medicine, they talk about every organ system, and there is an entire characteristic that's associated with it. There's an emotional tone, there's a spiritual tone, there's a time of the day that it acts the happiest. I mean, there is such a deep connection to emotions and spiritual health, to our physical organs in Chinese medicine and the Vedas. And when it comes to Western medicine, this was nothing new. For so long in Western medicine, we believe that there's a spiritual link to physical health. But it wasn't until the 1600s with Rene Descartes, which is a whole different story, and we could get into that another time. But that changed the course of medicine, and we started to separate the spirit from the science. So the medicine that we know today doesn't really incorporate them. But prior to that, for thousands of years, that was always the way it is. And if we go to the next slide, what I love is that we start to see the science behind. You know, those things like the angry drunk, the shy bladder, a broken heart. We're literally talking about an emotional quality or a spiritual quality and a physical organ. And that's nothing new. As you can see here on this beautiful wheel, this is Chinese medicine, where they take each of the elements. So in fire, in wood, in water, in metal, in earth, there's different organs, right? You have your spleen, your heart, your liver, your kidney, your lung. And those are all all the emotions that greatly impact that organ. So the shy bladder is real. Your kidneys can be really fearful and shy and timid. That's an emotion that your kidneys can experience and that it impacts their health. Same thing with our heart, right? Hatred, giddy, betrayal, manic, love. These are all big emotions from your heart that impact the physical organ. So I thought this was like a great chart that we can all keep with us and look back to. And just out of curiosity, is there anything that stood out for anyone where they were like, oh my goodness, that makes sense for me. When I experience this, this happens. Or is there anything that stands out for anyone with this? Oops.
So I'm just kind of, because this just hit me, and so I'm just sharing. So
We love it.
one of the things I wrote down on the health puzzle and was the word overweight, people around me, my mother, kind of where she's at now, and if you've seen my goal sheet, it's all about this journey towards optimum health and this whole centenarian club focus. And on water, kidney. So recently I just had a kidney stone, and so, this whole, like, maybe there's a little bit of, being that fearful, and things just kind of come together, right? So, anyways, just a share of kind of what just popped in.
I love that. And, Thomas, thank you so much for sharing, because you brought up something really important, right? We have a physical problem, a physical ailment. Let's say we had kidney stones or, whatever it may be. And what I love about what you mentioned is that all we're doing is associating it with an emotional or spiritual quality. We're not saying this is the reason why I have kidney stones. We're not saying this caused it, but we're starting to put into our awareness the concept of, hey, what emotions were really present? What event happened? Did I experience something that then brought in a lot of different emotions that could have impacted my health? Doesn't mean it was the cause, but it's something to start having in our health puzzle or in our consciousness, right? And the more that we get used to this concept, the easier it becomes. Over time, it'll be, oh, you know what? This happened to me, but at the same time, oh, I just broke up with my boyfriend and I had trouble letting go and there was so much grief and then I got pneumonia. Or, right? It's just adding to our health puzzle the way that we can understand our physical health. So thank you so much for sharing, Thomas. That was great. And so as you can see here, again, there's just so many different emotions that can impact different organs. It's not a coincidence that we call it the angry drunk. The liver harbors anger. And so when we drink a lot, what are we doing? We're stimulating that emotion. And so this is just a fun chart, and please keep this with you and look back on it. And the other thing is, we're sort of connecting the spiritual and the physical, but there's so many other people and other ways that this could be done. Has anyone here heard of Louise Hay? Just like a raise a hand. Okay, no? Okay, I see some no's. I see, oh, beautiful. Okay, I'm so excited. So if we go to the next slide, Louise Hay is a wonderful woman. She's not a medical doctor. She's not a scientist. She's someone who found that there is a deep connection to our spiritual well-being and our physical. And she dedicated her life to writing books that really clearly explain the spiritual tone of certain diseases. And so as we look here, these were just a few examples. She has many books that goes into all the details of it. But what she talks about is how every single disease, there's that quality to it, that emotional quality, right? And so, for example, diabetes, she talks about how it has this longing for what might have been, a great need to control, deep sorrow, no sweetness left. She refers to that as the spiritual tone of the physical disease. And again, these are just some examples, but it goes to show that this connection that we might have been, that in Western medicine might have been lost, has always been there. And a lot of these are congruent with the chakras, with the Veda system, with the Chinese medicine system. So they all sort of look the same and talk the same. For example, hives, small hidden fears, right? Mountains of molehills, which makes so much sense. Low back pain. Our back is our spine. It keeps us feeling very strong and secure. And so if we have back pain, it represents our supportive life. We're not feeling supported. And again, we just want to keep these in mind because it's another great tool to bring out when we're going through something and physically it doesn't always explain it for us, right? We're complicated beings. We're dynamic. And so right off the bat, we kind of see that there's that spiritual and emotional. Does anyone have any questions, by the way? We're feeling okay?
I'm loving this, Allie. I think that this is such a good tie-in to what we were talking about a few weeks ago, even with the connection between your immune system and when you get sick and
Yes.
on that. So this is so incredible. And I just want to go back to this wheel here. I think this is such a good resource for us to see the different, and maybe we can do another presentation with Allie one day to go into traditional Chinese medicine a little bit deeper, because these emotions, they govern each organ system, but it actually, the way I see it in practice is massive. And I can even see it myself with here, like the kidney and the fear. This is so big for me. When I feel fearful, if I get all of a sudden startled, or if I feel stressed for a long time, I can actually feel it in my low back. So it's just so interesting. Like when we start to learn these connections, we become so much more empowered in our bodies, because we can start to manage and check out, what Jenna was saying with the long-term stress, and feel what that's doing to our body, feel what that's doing to our organ systems, and help that to come back in line. So I'm loving this.
Sorry,
Yes. No, go ahead.
Just for people who aren't as familiar with Chinese medicine. So the spleen is more just like your digestive system. Don't think of it as like the Western medicine spleen, because I think that's like a very big problem for a lot of people is digestive issues. And you think about that like nervous stomach, that worry. So just for reference, I'm sure we'll go into more detail another time. But for those of you who may have digestive problems, think of that as the spleen, the earth element.
True, that one's not as straightforward, but
yeah. Other ones are pretty straight.
That's a great point. Absolutely. And yes, Chinese medicine is fascinating, the way we're able to explain this. And I think it's important because we live in a very physical world. Like our healthcare system today is very mechanical. Everything is separate. Nothing is connected. You go to the cardiologist for your heart. You go to the hematologist for your blood. You go to the nephrologist for your kidney. Nobody's talking to each other. And there's always the assumption that it's a physical problem. You need a physical drug. You need a physical surgery. So we're really, our current view of healthcare today is very physical. And all I'm saying is, hey, wait a second. We're also emotional and spiritual beings. How does that play a role in our health? And more importantly, I find it's empowering, because if we're constantly just in the eyes of Western medicine, where we're a broken machine and we have to go to all these individual people to get ourselves fixed, that is so disempowering. That doesn't really give us a lot of tools and oomph to take charge of our own health. And so when we get to look at it from an emotional and spiritual perspective, those are our emotions. That's our spirit. You can't take it out and, put it in this box and cut it up. So this is another way that we can empower ourselves in our health by taking self-responsibility, by having a lot of self-awareness in our emotions. I mean, we're all human. We're all going to react. We're all going to, be giddy or hateful or judgy or fearful. But if we can say, wait a second, I'm feeling this. What does this mean? How can that impact my health? You now have another tool to help you in the long run. And that is what it's all about. And so, yes, this chart is great. Please print it out, keep it. I actually have one of these in my journal. So when I am journaling, and sometimes you're not really sure what you're feeling, but you don't want to just like plug it into anger or depression, you can really identify your emotions. And I find it very helpful when journaling. So this could be a fun thing for you guys to do too. So we'll move on to the next slide. Let's see. And then one more. Perfect. Okay. I'm so excited. So right now we're talking about how stress, emotions, we don't really talk about trauma. We're going to talk about it, but we're talking about how they can impact our health. So if an emotion can impact our health, I'm stressed, immune system shuts down, right? I'm fearful, my kidneys are getting the brunt end of that. So if I know that there's this connection, how does inherited trauma impact our health? Because for the most part, when we talk about trauma, we think of these big T's, these big events. I mean, I spoke about how my grandfather was in the Holocaust. Thomas, your mother had her own traumatic journey from escaping Eastern Germany. So, but these big T's, essentially what they are big emotions. They're big emotions impacting our spiritual health. And I also want to remind us that it's not always the big T's, the big traumas. A lot of us are deeply impacted by the little T's. And that's anything where we might not have had enough of what we needed, or we had too much that we can handle. And so think about in our childhood. I mean, for those of us who do have children, we see that impact directly in our children when they have their tantrums or they're having an emotional outburst, right? You can see in that moment, they're experiencing too much that they can handle, or they don't have enough of what they need. They don't have the tools to express it or to deal with it. And so these little T's also affect our physical health, because that puts us in a deep state of stress. And depending on the emotion, that organ is going to feel it. So I'm just curious, now that we've been talking about it, how does inherited trauma impact our physical health? What are you guys thinking? And there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. We're just exploring it all together.
I was going to say that when I think of trauma, like when we experience a traumatic event, there is so much stress that gets put onto our bodies, and that has a physical implication. And I think the way I'm starting to think about this, and I think you're putting it really well, and I'm so excited to learn more about it. But when we're having those negative physical implications on our bodies, that is then kind of, the state that we're in is what we're passing along to those that, we're giving birth to. Or, if I'm experiencing trauma after trauma after trauma, I just see my body kind of declining in physical health. And then if that's the state you're in when you're actually, when I'm having my daughter and raising her, then that kind of physically, that negative physical state of health then impacts kind of the genes that she's receiving from me and the experience that she's receiving from me as well.
That was so beautifully said. Yes, that is amazing. Exactly, right? A way I like to think about it too is, imagine if every time we live a very fearful existence. And so every time we feel that deep emotion of fear, it's like there's someone just punching our kidney, and then our kidney gets, a little bruise. And over time, there's now impact. Our kidney has, you get hit all the time, you're going to have those funky ears and things are going to change on you, right? I'm thinking about those UFC fighters. And so if your kidneys are constantly getting hit, impacted, when you then go to pass on your genes or have a child, you're passing it on with a kidney that's been severely impacted. And so how does that translate? So you said that perfectly. Thank you so much for sharing that. And something I also want to add is a very interesting fact, which is that before you're even conceived, you are sharing the same environment as your mother and your grandmother. Does that make sense? Okay. And I can go into it, but essentially what's happening is that when your grandmother is pregnant with your mother, her eggs are being developed inside, which means that you, which are in the egg of your mother, who's now in your grandmother's belly, are all being impacted by the same environment. There is a lot there. So absolutely it imprints us. Absolutely it imprints us. And I'm going to have Marissa just change the slide. Let's see. Okay, one more. Perfect. Okay, amazing. So this just goes a little bit more into how that inherited trauma impacts our health. And these are some of the many: mental, emotional, autism, ADHD, our attachment style. And for those of you who don't know, that's how we experience relationships. Do we have a secure attachment? Do we have an anxious attachment? Do we have an avoidant attachment? And we could go into that with in another time. PTSD, anxiety, depression, codependency, addiction. These are all the impacts of inherited trauma. And it makes sense. Okay. Oh, sorry. I'm on my phone and I think I muted myself for a second. If emotions impact our physical health and in turn give rise to disease states, those disease states can be inherited from generation to generation. And let me just check. Tanya just said, I can see that fully with my two kids. My first, I was very stressed and had anxiety. With my second, I was in a great place, so happy. As babies, my first very colic, and my second was so peaceful. How interesting that you could now sort of have that direct example. And you're absolutely right. That environment plays a huge role in the health and well-being of our children, of those around us, of our cells, of the cells that we pass on. And so these are just some of the many ways that it impacts our physical health. And I'll have you go to the next slide. So this is one of my favorite quotes. Is everyone here familiar with Carl Jung? Okay, psychoanalyst, philosopher, you talk about Sigmund Freud, he was up there. He was up there with all of them. And he said, I feel very strongly that I'm under the influence of things or questions which were left incomplete and unanswered by my parents and grandparents and more distant ancestors. It often seems as if there were an impersonal karma within a family, which is passed on from parents to children. And it has always seemed to me that I have to almost complete or perhaps continue things which previous ages had left unfinished. And that's what I strongly believe. It didn't start with you. It didn't start with you. And perhaps some of you are familiar with those terms that we hear, which is you can break the cycle, right? You can be the cycle breaker. You can do it. This is a term that's been sort of, popping around a lot in self-help and new age. And I think it's talking to this subject specifically, that we inherit things, whether we are aware of it or not, beliefs, thoughts, fears, health states from our ancestors. And we can stop the cycle today because we can bring awareness to it. And so if we go to the next slide, it's just sort of a little brief on what we think of. So think of inherited trauma as inherited family patterns, the fears, the feelings, behaviors, anything that we've unknowingly adopted that keep the cycle of suffering alive from generation to generation. And and we'll get into this in the next few slides, but, like the most obvious example is we've heard of, the drunk in the family. Or, right, this cycle that continues. Oh, my father was an alcoholic, I'm an alcoholic, my great-grandfather, right? That pattern that continues. Or maybe it's little things, little anxieties that you've picked up from your parents or your grandparents that unknowingly you don't even know, and they're ruling your life. And so these are all those things that we're referring to. So if we go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about genes, because they do play a role. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but on my health puzzle, genes were a part of it. They weren't everything, but they were one piece of my health puzzle. Because, hey, we're made from genes. We get our moms, we get our dads, boom, they become ours. And they absolutely do impact our life. But the difference is that it was once believed that our genes were the blueprint. Like your mom, your dad, they mesh, they create a blueprint. That is you to the T. Time goes on and you're just playing out every single thing that's on there. But that's actually not the case. Genes are just a starting point. They're just, think of it like you get a blank MacBook. It's the operating software, but you can still edit it and transform it and create apps and hack it and code it. You can tell I'm not in the computer world because it wasn't as smooth, but you know what I'm trying to say. It's like the software and you can build on it. But what we do know today is epigenetics. The fact that our environment, as early as conception, can shape us emotionally, psychologically, biologically, and throughout our life. So we could be born with a certain set of genes, but that doesn't mean that they're going to play out. And we have the power to change it through our environment. Something else that's so interesting is if we talk about genes, so we have our DNA, which is like super long, could probably, from here to the universe, that's how long our genes are if we were to uncoil them. And for so long, researchers were like, this is so weird. Like, we know that these genes code for a protein. We can see it. But there's so much random letters in the middle that don't code for anything. So they used to call it junk DNA. They said, oh, it's just junk DNA. It doesn't code for a protein. It doesn't code for your blue eyes. We know all the codes, and this doesn't mean anything to us. So they just dumped it in as junk DNA. But now research has found that junk DNA, it's not junk at all. It's actually responsible for all the emotional, behavioral, fearful, personality traits that we inherit. So talk about that inherited family trauma. It's in what they used to call junk DNA. And so if we move on to the next slide, okay, so I'm so excited. So there's 2 researchers in this field who did such wonderful research to help us understand a little bit more of what inherited trauma really means. So there's this woman named Yehuda. She did a lot of research out of Cedars-Sinai Hospital. She did it on 3 main groups. She did it on pregnant women, Holocaust survivors, and war veterans. And across the board, the research was the same. For pregnant women who developed PTSD in 9/11, not only did they have lower cortisol levels, cortisol is our stress, but their kids had lower cortisol levels, and their kids were more likely to develop things like PTSD, anxiety, chronic fatigue, chronic pain syndrome. And that same thing was found in Holocaust survivors. Those who were survivors themselves had lower cortisol, so lower stress, and their children had lower stress, and their grandchildren. They were able to track changes in the stress response of up to 3 generations. Same thing for war veterans. So essentially, you're 3 times more likely to develop PTSD, depression, anxiety, anything that your ancestors had gone through, or your parents. And I'm curious to know if anyone's thinking like, wouldn't all this trauma and stress increase their stress hormones? Who's thinking that? Just out of curiosity. Yeah, me too, right? Like if you're under so much trauma and stress and emotions, shouldn't we have more stress response to that? And what was fascinating about this is this was the first time that they found that actually it's not true. When your body is in a constant state of stress, or there are constant, very intense emotions or trauma that you are experiencing, our bodies are so incredibly smart. It's basically saying, why am I going to waste 100% of my energy every day pumping out stress hormones? I get it. We're afraid. I get it. It's unsafe. It's always been unsafe. So why would I want to waste more energy doing that when this is now my normal? So what happens is your stress glands become fatigued. They're weakened. They say, we're done. If you want us pumping out 120% every day, we can't do it. We get it. There's a bear constantly chasing us. Sorry, we're not working anymore. And that's what happens. So you're actually passing on to your kids and your grandkids impaired stress responses. Because you've been stressed for so long, your adrenals say we're not working anymore, only low levels, then your kids get low levels and your grandkids get low levels. So we're really passing on that exhausted adrenal gland. There's another research that I love so much. I think it's amazing. So if we go to the next slide. This was mice research. And what was so fascinating about it was, I mean, one thing about mice is they reproduce very quickly. So you're able to see lots of generations in a short period of time. So what they did was they took the first generation of mice, and every time the mice smelt a cherry blossom, which had a very strong scent, they would electric shock them. Okay, it's not nice, but aside from that. So every time they would smell this, they would get electrocuted. Immediately after a week, in that first generation, they found that the mice developed increased receptors for that one smell. So their nose was more primed to be able to smell the cherry blossom. They also had more receptors in their brain that had to do with that cherry blossom and fear. But this is where the most exciting part was, okay? Just in the first generation, when they had their pups and their grandpups, so now the second and third generation, not only did they also have those same changes, the second and third generation had more nerves to sense the cherry blossom. They had more receptors in their brain for that connection of cherry blossoms equals bad, and even more so without ever being electrocuted. The second and third generation were jumpy and avoided the cherry blossoms. Is that not fascinating? how those fears were passed on to the next and next generation. These mice had no idea why or how to be afraid of cherry blossoms, but they knew deep down it was. That to me is just. Does anyone have any questions about that, or anything they want to add, or maybe their own personal experience of, hey, I've noticed this?
I think about me and how I've always just been scared of snakes. And I don't know why, like I didn't have any childhood experiences like that. And I look at my mom and she's like way worse. She's like far more terrified of snakes. And I don't think she had any direct experiences either. But there's a good chance that somewhere along the line, maybe an ancestor got bitten by a poisonous snake, or there was something like that. And often, when you see these negative, traits that are passed on, it sounds like a bad thing, but really it's just an evolutionary response to keep you alive. It's a survival mechanism, which would make sense, because if you were exposed to that in the wild, you would want to have that fear response so it doesn't happen to you again. And then it makes sense to pass it on to your kids so that they can survive. So I think, logically in my head, a lot of these adaptations are really just a, evolutionary thing to stay alive. Right. So.
I love that you said that. Is such a great point. And you said it perfectly, right? If we never got that messaging, if that messaging never passed on to us, I don't think we'd really survive as a species. If your ancestors were eaten by snakes, but the message that snakes are dangerous doesn't get passed on, then the next generation will be like, oh, look at the cute little snake. That's not very helpful for us. And so that's like a very empowering way to look at this. Yeah, fear response passed on to us. Exactly. That's what it is. And, it's the same thing that, look, our body can't differentiate stress. Our body doesn't know the difference between a bear chasing us and a deadline coming up, or confrontational conversation, right? Our body does not know the difference. But yet, we have that response. It's the same thing with this, right? What's passed on to us, it might not be serving us, but it was passed on for a reason, because our bodies are smart and they're constantly trying to do the best thing to keep us safe and to allow us to survive. And so by having some awareness on what are these things that were passed on, right? What are these fears that I have, and where does it come from? And is it serving me? Maybe it is. Like in Andrew's case, being scared of a snake, I think that's a good thing. And so these are really, really, really good questions to ask, good ways to look at it. It's all beautiful. It's all positive. And if we have the awareness and we have the ability to take a look, to ask questions, to go a bit deeper. And so let me just get back to here. Okay, perfect. So then we'll go on to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Are we there? Oh, perfect. Okay, amazing. Yes. So how does trauma impact our health? I mean, we pretty much spoke a lot about it, right? Those fears, those beliefs, those attitudes, those are going to be absolutely inherited, but they also play out in various different ways. Anxiety, addiction, methylation issues, right? Our body will do things to help us survive, and that's not necessarily for the best interest of our optimal health, but it's for the interest of survival. And that's how our body's thinking of it. So genetically, environmentally, chemically, there's so many different ways that this impacts our health. And through my own journey, I realized that I have a lot of inherited trauma from my grandfather, right? I have issues trusting people and opening up to people. And that comes from him and his experience. And instead of looking at it like a negative, I look at it like, oh, I'm very skeptical. And that's a good thing. I get to ask a lot of questions. I get to really ensure that I'm trusting someone. So reframing it and turning it around into a way that empowers you is also a very helpful and healing thing to do. And I'm going to actually ask some questions. So, again, this is a big topic. There's a lot to discuss with this, and we could take this in so many different ways. But I figured this was a great introduction. Just just to start thinking about it, to plant the seeds, to add it to our health puzzle, and to every now and then when something comes up, be able to ask the question. And if you are curious more about your own family history and ways that, generational trauma can impact you, I am going to post in the Slack a list of questions that you can either ask your parents, your grandparents if they're still alive, questions that you can ask yourself and just start to explore and see what comes up for you. But this can be, for example, family history questions, anything from who died early? Was there anyone who died early as an infant or a teenager or in their early 30s? Did anybody leave? Did anybody leave a marriage or leave a family, right? That abandonment, right? Our fears of abandonment, our fears of worthiness. There's so many things that can be passed on. You can ask things like, did anyone commit a crime in our family? Did anybody die in childbirth? Did anybody suffer in a war? I mean, there's a whole list of questions that you can start asking to start learning about this process. You could even ask your parents if you feel comfortable, right? Yes, now I want to interview my parents. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And you know what else is so cool about this? It also gives us an opportunity to connect. I mean, Thomas, when you first shared, you had mentioned how your mother was it felt so good for her to take you through that journey, for her to share her story, because that is healing in itself. And giving people to the opportunity to tell their story. Wow. And so often we're so afraid to ask our grandparents or our parents things, but let's ask these. Did you have a traumatic birth? Did you experience a difficult birth? Were you adopted? Did you have a good relationship with your own parents, right? I mean, there's so many questions that we can ask to learn more and to connect to our ancestors. Yes, I love that. A documentary in the making. Count me in. I will help you. That is awesome. So are there positive questions? Yes, there are also positive questions. But I guess the biggest thing when it comes to trauma is we're thinking about those like big fearful things that kind of put the body in a state of shock or hurt our physical organs. And that's what we're really looking at when we're trying to learn more about our family history. But there still are some positive questions, and I'm going to post all of these in the Slack today. So you guys will have access to these, and it's a good way to get the conversation going and start that thinking.
I love that. And you can even add in, like, if there is a positive thing about you, like, why do I love, rainbows so much, like and you can add that in and see if that's something that your parents, your grandparents can relate to as well, and see if that's something that was also inherited.
That is such a great point, Marissa. I love that. Like, start taking note of all the things that make you feel good, that you resonate with, maybe that you're attracted to. Hey, how come I love rocks so much? That's me. I do love rocks. What's that got to do? Maybe there's something in my family where, we had to collect rocks. I'm not sure. I just took that there, but definitely positive things too, not just negative. And then for those of us that do have kids, it also allows us to have some awareness and in what am I passing on, right? How much of my kids' anxieties right now are my own? And how can I work on myself to help them? Because that's what I want to do, right? I want to create a great environment for them where they can break the cycle, where I can break the cycle because I have the awareness to do so. And hopefully this whole conversation empowered us all and not made us feel overwhelmed by all the amount of ancestors we have and things, that we have to do, but instead just added to our health puzzle of a different way to look at our health, because health is so darn complicated and there's so many little things to it. And the most we can do is just fill our toolbox with a little bit more tools and ways that we can feel empowered.
Wow. That was so incredible, Allie. Thank you so much. It really is like a health puzzle. It is. It's like, and each individual so different, right? And that's where this type of information can really empower you to look and to have that self-reflection and see what makes you tick, like really deeply understand yourself. And then, what Tanya was reflecting in the chat was when she was pregnant with her first, she was more anxious, and that reflected in her firstborn. And the second, she was much more peaceful, and this was reflected in her secondborn. So it's so interesting, and you can use this in so many different ways, no matter where you are in the journey. I just love every bit of this. So thank you so much, Allie.
Thank you, everybody, for giving me this opportunity. I mean, I love these topics so much. And again, I look at everything like it's just another piece of the puzzle. And nothing is an absolute truth. There's multiple truths that exist at once. But hey, if we can empower ourselves a little bit more, that's awesome. And you guys were wonderful. And I'm so happy you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I just have a quote here that I read the other day that kind of ties into all this, and I found it very powerful. So it says, trauma travels through family lines until someone is ready to heal it. Your ancestors and celebrate every time you do the work.
Oh,
That's really cool. You're not just doing it for yourself to make a better life, but I truly think that, I just see my ancestors when you're doing that, they're like clapping or something, like thank you, because I think it does affect them in a different way, in a non-linear timeline, right? So it's very cool.
I couldn't agree more. And that just sent shivers to me. That was so beautifully, beautifully put. And I couldn't agree more with you, right? By doing the work now, you actually heal our ancestors. And that means that they don't have to come back in generations to come, right? They can say, oh, we've healed that part of ourselves. Okay, our karma's balanced. Thank you, right? That's such a beautiful thing. So thank you for bringing that up, Andrew.
Does anybody have any questions for Allie? We have a couple minutes left. If anybody has any questions or insights or takeaways, what was your main takeaway from today?
Or even just a random thought.
Sorry, I was speaking so much, I guess. But so I'm just thinking back to my daughter, 17. She had a significant accident. A tree fell on her and crushed her skull. And she's doing amazing right now. But I was just thinking the impact on her, on us, on my mom, because my mom was right there. And then looking at this wheel, and then like either there's a feeling of guilt or like there's just so many things. But then listening to Andrew, what you just said, having this conversation now to forgive and make sure that everybody knew, like, okay, like, no hard feelings, like forgiveness and things like that can make a huge impact. Because if Annalisa's feeling bad or my mom, and anyways, it's just kind of neat how all these spiritual conversations can make a big difference to everybody's health, right?
Yeah,
That is so good. To everybody's health, exactly. Not just our own, but to those who experience something, who were involved by proxy or right by. Absolutely. And I think for a lot of previous generations and, maybe even still, it's not easy to have these conversations. But by doing so, you do some healing by opening up your heart a little bit and saying, hey, do you feel this way? And, I want you to know I forgive you. These are powerful words that can have lasting impacts on our physical and emotional health. So absolutely, Thomas, thank you.
And sometimes people don't even know that they need to hear that, or it needs to be said, right? That could be more healing for you than for anybody else, right? But if you're feeling the call to have that conversation, I think there's truth in it for you.
Yeah, and that's just
Tanya,
one to
yeah.
Like releasing those emotions is like speaking about it. For other people, sometimes it's just journaling, just writing it down, or it could be more of a somatic thing. I think a lot of these traditional cultures, like they have these rituals of ecstatic dance or using psychedelics or sweat lodge, like so many different ways to, just release those traumas. And we don't really have a framework for that in modern society. But I think you just need to find the tools that work for you, whatever calls to you, and just try to, work through that stuff. And it's not like you ever really totally get rid of it. Like that's part of you, that's part of your story, these traumas, but you find a way to integrate it and make it more harmonious rather than something that's constantly, interrupting your chakra system or whatever it is.
It's absolutely so true. And Tanya, I like what you wrote in the group chat, right? We can do the work for our ancestors. And I remember when I first started this journey, I read something that said, it's time to forgive and thank your grandparents. And I remember reading that and being like, I don't understand what I need to thank or forgive them for. And only later on in the journey was I like, oh, I need to thank and forgive you. It's okay. Right. Because what comes and passed down to the parents and then to me. And so just even having that in mind, who can I forgive and who can I thank? Right.
Yeah, and
That's
remembering everyone's doing the best they can with what they have, with the resources.
Yes.
So even when we look at our parents or our grandparents, we can feel frustrated for some of the traumas or whatever. And you're not a victim to it. You know, it's like it happened because they were doing the best they can with what they had, with the resources they had, with the information they had, with the energy, the capacity that they held. So yeah, that forgiving piece is huge. You are not a victim to any of this. You know, it's like really uses as an empowerment tool. And that thanking and forgiving is essential.
Yeah.
And thanks for mentioning, that's what I was looking for the words before, and that is, what can we appreciate people for? That's kind of what I was looking for in that, you know, what are the positive things we can say, but what can we appreciate them for? Because we are that so much better because of them as well, not just the negative things.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And even turning the negatives into the positive, right? You know, thank you for going through what you went through, because now you made me smarter for when I'm doing X or doing Y. And because of that, I'm now transforming it into this. So thank you. You're absolutely right. Finding the good and the bad too. So these are all amazing, amazing thoughts and good conversations. And I just want to thank you all for being a part of this, because this was so fun for me.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Ali, so much. We are so grateful that you're here and sharing your wisdom with us. That was incredible. I think there's a lot of takeaways. I'm going to be watching the replay like 3 more times, take it all in. I loved it.
Thank you all so much. And I will add into the Slack some fun questions, and then we can keep the conversation going there.
Sounds
Sweet.
good.
Thank you.
Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody. We'll be
Thank you.
next Thursday, so we'll see you there.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.